In a move that has sent shockwaves across the international community, President Trump has announced significant cuts to US foreign aid. This decision marks a dramatic shift in American foreign policy, one that could have far-reaching consequences for the world. Critics argue that these cuts are not only morally wrong but also strategically unwise, potentially undermining US influence globally while paving the way for other powers like China to fill the void. The Trump administration argues that these cuts are necessary to reduce wasteful spending and prioritize America's interests. However, many experts disagree. They point out that foreign aid constitutes a tiny fraction of the US budget, and its impact far outweighs its cost. The decision to slash foreign aid has been met with widespread condemnation from humanitarian organizations, foreign policy experts, and world leaders. They warn that the cuts will have devastating consequences for the world's most vulnerable populations, pushing millions further into poverty. As the US retreats from its traditional role as a global leader, China is eagerly stepping in to fill the void. China has been steadily increasing its foreign aid and investment in developing countries, particularly in Africa and Asia. This has allowed China to gain significant political and economic leverage in these regions. With the US cutting back on foreign aid, China has a golden opportunity to expand its influence even further. China can now position itself as a more reliable partner to developing countries, offering much-needed aid and investment without the strings attached. This shift in global power dynamics has raised concerns among US policymakers and analysts. They fear that China's growing influence could undermine US interests and values, leading to a less stable and prosperous world. Trump's foreign aid cuts target a wide range of programs, including those focused on humanitarian assistance, development, and global health. Among the most critical programs facing the axe are those aimed at combating infectious diseases like HIV, AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. The President's emergency plan for AIDS relief, credited with saving millions of lives in sub-Saharan Africa, is facing significant funding reductions. Similarly, programs providing critical food aid to famine-stricken regions are also on the chopping block. These cuts are not just about numbers on a spreadsheet, they represent a lifeline for millions of people around the world. They are the difference between life and death for vulnerable communities already struggling with poverty, conflict, and disease. Despite the Trump administration's claims of excessive spending, US foreign aid constitutes a minuscule portion of the federal budget. In fact, it accounts for less than 1% of total federal spending. This means that for every dollar the US government spends, less than a penny goes towards foreign aid. To put this into perspective, the US spends more on its military in a single year than it does on foreign aid over a decade. The amount allocated to foreign aid is dwarfed by spending on defense, social security, and healthcare. Critics argue that the meager amount the US dedicates to foreign aid pales in comparison to the immense benefits it yields, both for recipient countries and for US interests. They point out that foreign aid not only saves lives and alleviates suffering, but also promotes stability, strengthens economies, and enhances global security. Section 5, A World on the Brink, the dire consequences of aid reduction. The consequences of Trump's foreign aid cuts are already being felt around the world. In many developing countries, US aid is the only thing standing between vulnerable populations and disaster. With these cuts, the world is likely to see a surge in preventable diseases, increased malnutrition and starvation, and a heightened risk of conflict and instability. The cuts to health programs will likely lead to a resurgence of deadly diseases like HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. The World Health Organization has warned that the progress made in the fight against these diseases could be reversed, resulting in millions of preventable deaths. Furthermore, the reduction in food aid will exacerbate hunger and malnutrition, pushing millions more people into food insecurity. The UN's World Food Programme has warned that the cuts will have a devastating impact on its ability to provide food assistance to those most in need. Section 6, The Human Cost, Displaced Populations and Modern Slavery. The impact of these cuts extends beyond immediate health and hunger crises. They also undermine efforts to address long-term development challenges, including forced displacement and modern slavery. Millions of people around the world are currently displaced from their homes due to conflict, persecution, and climate change. US aid plays a crucial role in providing humanitarian assistance to refugees and internally displaced persons, offering them food, shelter, and medical care. The cuts will leave these vulnerable populations even more exposed to exploitation, abuse, and human trafficking. Moreover, the funding cuts will hamstring efforts to combat modern slavery, a crime that affects millions worldwide. US aid supports programs that rescue and rehabilitate victims of human trafficking, as well as initiatives that work to prevent slavery and prosecute traffickers. Section 7. A global uproar, legal challenges, and international condemnation. The international community has reacted with a mix of dismay and anger to Trump's foreign aid cuts. World leaders, humanitarian organizations, and foreign policy experts have condemned the move, warning of its dire consequences for the world's most vulnerable people. The United Nations Secretary General has called on the US to reconsider its decision, emphasizing the vital role of foreign aid in promoting peace, security, and development. The European Union has also expressed its concern, stressing the need for continued international cooperation and solidarity. Within the US, legal challenges have been mounted against the administration's attempts to withhold or redirect congressionally approved foreign aid. Several lawsuits argue that the administration's actions are unconstitutional and undermine the separation of powers.
Well, there's a lot of things to read or talk about USAID. What is the United States Agency for International Development? Who runs the USAID? What good has USAID done? What is a USAID activity? There's a whole lot to read if you go in there. But let's take a quick look at one of these. Who runs the USAID? United States Agency for International Development. This is the agency of annual budget of $50 billion. Agency executives include the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, acting administrator. That is it in the UK. The website is uaid.gov. Now, that is it on the USAID. Let's hear the more report.
Section 8. A call to action. Experts urge for reversal of aid cuts. Despite the bleak outlook, many experts believe that it is not too late to reverse course. They argue that the US must reaffirm its commitment to global development and humanitarian assistance by restoring funding for foreign aid and working to strengthen these vital programs. Several former US diplomats and military leaders have spoken out against the cuts, arguing that they undermine US national security by fueling instability, extremism, and anti-American sentiment abroad. They emphasize that foreign aid is not just a moral imperative, but also a smart investment in a safer, more prosperous world. Many organizations and individuals are urging the US Congress to take a stand against the administration's cuts and prioritize funding for foreign aid. They are calling on citizens to contact their elected officials and demand that they protect and expand US foreign aid programs. Section 9. Conclusion. A myopic vision, a world in peril. President Trump's decision to slash foreign aid is a short-sighted and dangerous policy that will have devastating consequences for the world. It undermines decades of progress in global health, development, and security, leaving millions of people vulnerable to disease, hunger, and violence. This misguided policy is not only morally reprehensible, but also strategically foolish. It undermines US leadership and influence on the world stage, ceding ground to rivals like China and fueling anti-American sentiment. The US risks becoming a nation that is perceived as indifferent to the suffering of others, undermining its moral authority and credibility. It is not too late for the US to change course. By restoring funding for foreign aid and reaffirming its commitment to global engagement, the US can reclaim its role as a force for good in the world and help build a more just, peaceful, and prosperous future for all.
And if the fates should
Perhaps we're looking
bless
for one of a kind, the cultural exhibitions around the world, all traveled and places. Stay tuned to my channel, KB Jojo Newsbox, where I intend to give you every vital information, updates, interesting places, places of interest, tourism, and about people, culture around the world. Stay tuned on this channel. We promise to give you more. It's Thank you.
And if the fates should bless us with a moment of reprieve, we we all could stand together in the silence and just breathe. Rejoice for all the happiness, mourn for all the grief. It's all that I ask.